Hey everyone, me and Buster Green here. I'm an anime YouTuber and I am 42 people away from getting monetized. Yes, 42, the secret number that will solve all your problems. And all my problems are that I make YouTube videos every week and I don't get paid any money for doing that. So does that make me a slave? I don't know, but if 42 people would click that super subscribe button, my life would suddenly have meaning and I'd get paid for doing this work. Anyway, so this is going to be a bit of an unusual video today. This was originally going to be a throwback to one of my best episode videos, but see, the thing is, this is not a best episode. It's, quite frankly, the worst episode. So, here's the thing. Throughout the whole of human history, people have been racist and shitty to each other. Racism has been a prevailing problem for, the entire human race. People have gone from one country to another being racist against each other. And, sometimes this gets so bad that there's, a race war. Anyway, half the reason I'm even bringing this up right now is because Gundam This Week did an episode on, the nature of racism, and they did kind of a thought experiment of, how racism will evolve in the future to be more like a wealth-based classism racism, because people of different wealth classes will be forced to live in different places. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but that got me thinking about some racist animes I've seen in the past. Now, there are various different levels of racism exhibited by anime throughout the decades. Generally speaking, I want to say most anime are typically not that racist. Though you do get the occasional anime that praises the German Nazis while also just completely glossing over anything bad they ever did. Yep, those neo-Nazis were sure upstanding citizens. It gets so hard to be satirical in 2022. Or you also have numerous anime that just complain about how uneducated and weird Chinese people are. And by and large, most anime racism isn't your literal racism. It's more like this lighthearted, nationalistic racism. Like what you'd see in the Olympic Games, where it's not like, fuck you, you're ugly. It's more like, haha, your country is proud of that flavor of cheese? Why? It's not even spicy. But if I really have to draw a line in the sand, even when some animes do things that can really be construed as racist, it's never straight up blatantly racist designed to hurt people. It's more like a thoughtless, true statement about certain countries or certain people that could be construed as true at the time, and might be construed now as racist depending on how you describe it. But mostly they're just harmless statements that, a misguided child with no consideration for the greater world might make. I might even give a pass to the ignorant animes of the 1960s, where back then unworldly mangaka who wanted to write good or bad things about people from across the world just didn't have any non-racist materials to work with, so they would write these G-rated stories that now look racist in modern context because they drew certain people of certain races with certain undesirable features. However, the anime I'm going to discuss today does none of that. This anime goes full off the rails into fuck you, you're different, you're ugly, and you're ugly because you're from another country. It is malicious, it is hurtful. Not only does it lean and celebrate the worst stereotypes of a certain group of people, it celebrates them and revels in the cruelty of doing that. And on top of that, this anime was made in fucking 2007, in our lifetime, based on a manga that came out 2 years before that. This was created by people who lived in the post-internet age, people who should have known better, and as a result, this franchise has never been properly translated in the United States because this chapter is a fucking knife in your back. So let's talk about Neuro. I first got into Neuro when I played Jump Ultimate Stars in 2008. Neuro was this random character that was randomly given to me inside the game, and I found him cool because he was a guy with long hair wearing a suit. I am sometimes a guy with long hair wearing a suit. And at first, he kind of looked like a vampire. On top of that, a majority of his attacks involved him using a Japanese schoolgirl as a fucking bat, which intrigued me. Who is this girl? Why is she Neuro's weapon? Does she feel pain when Neuro uses her as a bat to smash people's faces in? It's a very visually interesting anime kind of concept. So fully based on the goodwill I had from the character from Jump Ultimate Stars, I searched out and I found the Neuro anime. And the Neuro anime and the Neuro manga, they kind of broke my heart, if I'm going to be real with you guys. Neuro is an anime I really wanted to like. However, the Neuro anime betrayed me and stabbed me with racism. Majin Tante Neuro, or in English Demon Detective Neuro, is a pretty cool premise of a show. It's not the most original show because it's essentially a weird mashup of some previous existing animes. The best way I can simplify it down for you guys, it's the scenarios and episode structure from Detective Conan / Case Closed, but then it's like the characters from Hellsing doing that. Okay, so to more blatantly, clearly explain the show is about Nogami Neuro, a demonic bird from hell. He has a human form, and it's pretty much a stereotypical handsome movie vampire guy, except instead of sucking blood, Neuro's things is he eats mysteries, and the only way for him to eat a mystery is for him to solve the mystery, and then when the mystery is solved, he can eat it. Now, honestly, the way it plays out in the show, it's kind of illogical. It doesn't really make sense. Like, Neuro eats mysteries, but they have to be solved in order for him to eat them, and there's some kind of window about how long between the mystery being solved and his ability to eat it. I'll be real with you guys and let you know, I haven't watched this show properly in 10 years because I dropped it on this 14th episode, and I might be a little bit fuzzy about the finer details of how the show all worked. The other main character in the show is Yako Katsuragi, the hero of the show, the heroine, the main teenage girl lead. She is like a schoolgirl, and she has a vendetta against cops because cops completely botched her dad's murder investigation and wrote it off as a suicide as to not investigate it. So Yako is trying to find the person who actually killed her dad, and she teams up with Neuro, and together they work as a tag team to be the protagonists of the show. See, she's a woman, and Neuro treats her like garbage and typically overrides her, but because Neuro is a demon and doesn't want to call attention to her himself, he has to use Yako as his kind of front man. So the show turns into kind of a zany comedy manga, where Yako is a weird protagonist with very little control over her own life and story. Now, I really forgot the specifics of how Neuro's powers even work. I think he has like basic demon powers, and I think they get stronger the closer he gets to solving the mystery, like eating the mysteries makes him stronger. Also, I forget if Neuro like exists in such a way that like only Yako Katsuragi can see him, but for the most part, Neuro forces Yako to find him mysteries, and then throughout the series, he's basically non-stop abusing her, using her as either his pet, his toy, his weapon, or his girlfriend. The two of them have this really bizarre abusive power couple dynamic that I almost never see in an anime. Like, I don't think I've ever seen this at all except for like a Harley Quinn Joker thing, except it's kind of like painted in a positive light in the series because they're both sort of hero characters. Also, in the manga, the interactions between like Neuro and Yako just kind of ooze with this extra inappropriate sexual tension since she's a teenager and he's a demon, but like he presents as like a full-grown man. Anyway, long story short, Neuro is way too hands-on with her, and she almost seems like in a certain way she wants him to seduce her, but he fundamentally won't because he's just a bird demon posing as a human, so he doesn't actually have like human sexuality. Also, I never got the intense Yako as a weapon action that Jump Ultimate promised me, or maybe Jump Ultimate played it up too much, like it was a normal thing he did all the time, whereas in the anime it rarely happens except as like a once-off comedy gag. So anyway, this show has fallen into obscurity over the years for two big reasons. Number one, it's never scary enough to work as a horror show. It's never sexy enough to work as a romantic show. It's never funny enough to work as a comedy show. And its biggest failing was, you would think as a mystery show, you could like play along with the characters and solve the mystery. Because, you know, that's the same basic cliche that like every episode of Detective Conan does. However, the show fails as a mystery show because they leave big chunks of logic out of the script, which basically prevents the audience from ever being able to actually solve the mystery before Yako and Neuro did. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I find mystery shows fun. Like, I just finished watching Fruitopia Eyes, and most of the mysteries in that show were pretty solvable, unless a random third party committed them. But I did completely solve the mansion mystery in that one. Anyway, I think in the smarter universe, they could have done Neuro as kind of like a Columbo formula, where you know who the bad guy is, and then the excitement of the show is watching Neuro figure it out, and then murder the bad guy. Unfortunately, the show just never went far enough to where it needed to go. Now that being said, for the first time in 10 years, I'm going to resubmit myself to the episode that went too far, and it went too far into racism. And that's episode 14 of Neuro. This is the episode that made me drop the series because it essentially, it was just too much, man. It's too fucking racist, and it like offended me personally when I was already feeling down. I'm probably gonna give you guys like the backstory here. When I first watched this episode, I was living in Japan. I was at an all-time personal low in my life. I'd been living in Japan for close to 2 years. And this episode was such a hideous sideshow of my worst subconscious fears about how people felt about being in Japan. It just like put everything out there and kind of put it on display, and it felt like it was attacking me personally. It felt like it was targeting me, and it really hurt my emotions. Like, this episode was a punch in the stomach at a time when I really didn't need to be punched in the stomach. So I just fucking hate this episode. Without further delay, the most racist anime ever made. Episode 14 of Neuro, the episode that made me drop the show. And for the sake of this dumbass YouTube channel, I'm gonna torture myself and watch it one more time. Will I be more angry at it a decade later, or less? Let's find out. Oh, and I guess just to make this even more absurd, I'm gonna install this racism meter over here that will fill with anger the more racist this episode gets. Alright, itadakimasu. So episode 14 of Neuro starts with Yako wandering around in a cold winter shopping plaza. Somehow she wins an all-expense-paid trip to a hot springs vacation from a local lottery stand. Oh, and on top of that, it comes with an all-you-can-eat buffet too, because one of the main themes of this anime is hunger, and Yako is always hungry. And so is Neuro for that matter. I guess that's why they get along. Anyway, so Neuro immediately steals Yako's tickets because he's an abusive demon boyfriend. And here's the opening of the show. I think in the manga, Neuro and Yako had more of a weird resemblance to each other. The anime makes them look a little bit different by not giving them the exact same haircut. But yeah, Neuro, it's a show about a skinny fat girl who just wants to eat and solve her dad's murder. But unfortunately, she's stuck with this abusive bird vampire boyfriend from hell who tries to help her with that, but mostly just keeps putting her in dangerous situations for his own benefit. Oh, and they also are friends with a dead girl's ponytail that they kind of keep as a pet or something. It's very Addams Family. Anyway, so they start driving up to this hot spring, and along the way they stop at a rest stop, and we're introduced to this American guy who loves Japan, and he has this sad Japanese girlfriend, and the racism PTSD is already kicking in. Anyway, so yeah, the subplot of the episode here is that there's an American guy who loves Japan. He wears this Japanese coat, he's taller than everyone else, and they drew them with this offensively unrealistically large nose, because that's a big stereotype Japanese people have about Americans. What's an American look like? They have blonde hair and big fucking noses. Anyway, so they're traveling with this other couple, and the American guy is dubbed extremely badly by this weird American actor who does not speak Japanese very well at all.
Oh, そこの素敵なお嬢さん。写真撮ってくださいよ。
Anyway, so Neuro mentions some weird proverb about how you can't enjoy something you've never seen, and then they continue going to the hot spring, but their car battery dies. So their scary Yakuza friend scares off the other car before it can give them a jump, and they end up having to push the car all the way to the hot spring. Now, Neuro has super strength, but he just sits in the car and does nothing, which is stupid. So anyway, they eventually push the car all the way to the hot spring, and then we see the asshole American character again. Now he shows up again to comment on about how disgusting Japanese public drinking water is, and he's not entirely wrong. Japanese drinking water is kind of a mixed bag of, sometimes it's kind of unsafe, especially if it's a contaminated water source, or a water source that's been sitting outside for a while, exposed to acid rain and other things. But anyway, the show plays it off as look at this ungrateful asshole American. How dare he insult the pure holy waters of Japan? Anyway, so Yako and Neuro show up, and because they are proud Japanese-born people, they drink literal buckets full of the disgusting outside water that the American man said was yucky. The mixed-race couple is shocked by this, and then we get our first mystery clue. The American guy's girlfriend has lost her cell phone. The American then casually says that someone must have stolen it. But who cares, because they're all going to a buffet tonight. So Yako and Neuro immediately somehow jump to the conclusion that the loud American guy is obviously abusing his Japanese girlfriend, since he didn't care to even make an attempt to find her lost cell phone. Now we stay on these random traveling guest characters who are celebrating how good the onsen is after the fact. Now, I'm not sure why the American actor's Japanese language is so exceptionally bad. It's like they didn't give him like any pronunciation like tips at all, and the intonation is just bizarre. It sounds like he's just phonetically reading the characters off a script, so he sounds completely crazy. Anyway, so they arrive at this buffet, and as they get there, they witness the horror that Yako has eaten the entire contents of this Japanese buffet in approximately under 30 minutes. Now, I do actually believe this is possible because I have seen some sad excuses for buffets in Asia, but they should have at least had the ability to restock or stop her from picking out. Yako apologizes to all the hotel guests, including a random kid who's crying over this, but she points out she didn't eat the natto. Alright, so this is a moment that leans really hard into stereotypes, and this is a moment that you might not get if you've never been to Japan, because this next whole scene is like a big shame play. Because there's more going on here than what you see on screen, and you kind of need to know the context of what's playing out in the scene. First of all, let's talk about natto. Natto is an intensely Japanese food, and it's a Japanese food that you never really see out of Japan, and the reason you never see it outside of Japan is because most stores choose to not stock it because it smells exactly like poop. See, natto is a kind of fermented soybean, and the soybean fermenting process makes a bacteria grow on the natto that makes it kind of slimy and gooey, and it's all bacteria. Anyway, because it's all bacteria, the bacteria smells exactly like poop. That being said, I've actually eaten natto, and I think I like it, because if you ignore the smell, it does taste about as good as like any other kind of soybean dish, like edamame. But the greater context is because like literally every foreigner who's ever been to Japan has been given natto as a test and immediately been like, what the fuck is this? This smells like poop. Now, over the years, Japanese people have kind of built up this expectation that if you give a foreigner a bowl of natto and they say it smells like poop and they don't eat it, they're fucking barbarians. And it's the very same flavor bullshit as when like racists in America give like black people crap for the food they like to eat. Except in this case, the Japanese kind of hold it up as like a test of like cultural ability. Because if a foreigner can actually eat the natto, they're considered like educated, refined, and cultured. But if they can't eat it, then they're fucking barbarian invaders. And why the fuck does your intelligence matter if you can eat soybeans or not? That's retarded. Anyway, so the American asshole immediately says the natto smells like poop, and so he's failed the natto test. And now the Japanese audience is even more turned against him because he's playing out the American barbarian stereotype. And this really annoys me because he like breaks into speaking English like over the natto, but his like English is like bad caveman English, like,
Oh, natto never. No, thank you.
the fuck? Does this guy even actually speak English? Anyway, this episode is in the middle of the show, so by this time, Yako has made a name for herself as a famous pig girl detective, and the American bastard is semi-familiar with her accomplishments because apparently she recently helped out a famous pop star in an earlier episode. Anyway, they're interested in her, she's interested in them. Yako decides to have dinner with these people. They all explain that they're a local language study group from a local college, and the American bastard introduces himself as David Rice, which is a stupid name. I want to just keep calling him American Bastard because that's what the show keeps like presenting him as, but fuck it, I'll call him David. Anyway, David's friend says he's a good transfer student who loves Japan so much, which is what I was at the time, so again, I feel super targeted by this episode. And it's not like I killed anyone or anything like that, it's just like this episode is like so about like how horrible Americans are if you haven't picked up by now. Anyway, so everyone's having a good time eating dinner, and then this downtrodden woman says she's not feeling well and departs for her room. The group decides to follow her and leaves Yako in the buffet. But then Neuro suddenly returns and makes her leave because he senses the mystery is about to happen. Am I understanding that Neuro predicts crimes before they happen? You would think that would make him more of a good guy, but I guess he has to actually allow the crime to play out and people to die in order to eat the mystery. So yeah, that disqualifies him from being a good guy. Anyway, then Yako goes to sleep in her room and Neuro sleeps on the ceiling above her, which is super creepy. Neuro tells her a random story that he released a monster fish into the hot spring. I am not sure why, but apparently he needed some kind of demon energy called Shoki to keep him from falling asleep. But he doesn't have it, so he's just going to sleep now. Neuro falls asleep, but since he's sleeping on the ceiling, he wakes Yako up because like a bullet falls out of him, and it also seems that he's like drooling like acid or boiling water or like something like that. Anyway, Neuro finally senses that the murders happened, so he wakes up. They go back to the hall and they find the American guy banging on Suki's door. They get another spare key from the hotel and discover that the room is completely filled with poisonous gas and Suki is dead. After the commercial break, they apparently try to resuscitate her, but they have no luck because she's been dead for too long. Now, David's bad acting in the scene once again undercuts the seriousness of the scene and makes him seem suspicious. The police are already on their way, but Yako completely doubts it's a suicide because her whole thing is that her dad's death was wrongly attributed as a suicide, so now she's just always suspicious of them. So Yako asks why Suki would kill herself, and the friends say that recently Suki has had a stalker, and the stalker was making her depressed and anxious and might have caused her to kill herself. And apparently the main reason they brought her on this onsen trip was to calm her down and try to make her not think about the stalker. Anyway, Neuro says that's all bullshit. No one would commit suicide by flooding their hotel room with poisonous gas, and that this had to be a homicide. He grabs Yako by the head and walks off with her, and I guess other people can see him, but they pay no attention to his flagrant child abuse. So they go back to the room where it happened, and apparently the poison gas has dissipated enough that they can check it out. Neuro points out that this hotel room has unopenable windows, making it absolutely ideal for a poison murder. So suddenly this turns into a locked room mystery since Suki had locked the door from the inside, but considering she was very paranoid of a stalker, that's not even that big of a mystery. Neuro also notices that there's a calculator in the room and says that a critical clue on the calculator is the number 911,333. Yako notices that number and guesses that it's yen, and guesses that if it was yen, it would round out to about $9,000. Anyway, so then Neuro goes back to the university students. David is still on a rant about what a perfect woman Suki was, while everyone else is just mourning in sad silence. And then Yako shows up in a cheerful mood and tells everyone that Suki dies. David weirdly takes it as a compliment, and Neuro obviously finds it too suspicious that he took her death as a compliment, so he possesses Yako and has Yako finger David as the murderer. Now his friends all defend him, but Neuro counters that Yako has undisputable evidence of David's guilt as the murderer. So they take everyone back to the murder room and they point out that the room's solid unopenable windows made the room a perfect killing device for someone using poison gas. Now the only thing that could have prevented the death was the front door being open, but unfortunately in this case the front door was locked. Now obviously Suki could have just opened the door and lived, but she didn't. Why was that? So Neuro drops a scenario that Suki was too frightened to open the door because David threatened to kill her, putting her in a loose scenario where she was dead either way. And apparently when he threatened to kill her, right before she slammed the door, he threw a bottle of poison in the room, making for an absolute death-on-death situation. Now, Neuro postulates that when we saw David banging on the door, he was innocent from everyone else's perspective, but Suki was hysterically afraid of him. And fuck, look at this. This is where they drop the racism. So suddenly, David transforms into the ugliest, most stereotypical version of an American you could imagine. His face gets much uglier. He has a 12-inch knife out of nowhere. He has an American flag bandana. Are those fucking stakes tied to his head? And he's got a fucking bandolier covered in hot dogs. And please notice that all the hot dogs contain lettuce because Japanese animators have never seen real hot dogs. David says this is bullshit and threatens to sue Yako for libel, which is actually something that happens more commonly in Japan, but it does play on the stereotype that Americans love to frivolously sue people as much as possible. Also, it's subtle at first, but as David becomes more obviously the murderer, they start drawing his nose larger and larger. If I'm going to be modest here, I'm going to think this was some kind of Pinocchio reference, but no, it's unfortunately just more racism. Neuro then points out that not only has Suki's cell phone been stolen, but she seems to not have any way to write or communicate with anyone at all in her purse. Even more suspicious, the room seems to lack anything related to writing as well, despite the fact that most hotels usually come with memo pads. Despite all that, Neuro holds up the number 911,333 on the calculator and says that this is the dying memo that IDs the killer. So apparently, if you type those numbers out on a mid-2000s old school cell phone with buttons, it spells out the word Rice, which is David's last name, which makes it pretty blatant he's the killer. Neuro informs him that the police are on the way to arrest him, and at this point, David snaps Ace Attorney style and starts singing the American national anthem. So then he turns around with his true face. His true face has an even longer nose, fucking like tiger fangs, and oh, guess what, everybody? Apparently all the things he loves about Japan, it turns out he was lying about that, and he actually hates Japan. So, dude, if you hate Japan, why are you in Japan? Then he rips off his robe to reveal his extremely disgusting and extremely shameful American body hair. Oh, by the way, spoilers for you guys. Japanese people hate body hair, and they hate when Americans have it. Anyway, so then his nose keeps growing, and then he rips off his robe, and then David pulls out a gigantic Cougar Magnum from his underwear. And at this point, they reveal that there's a demon living inside his nose. Actually, they don't really reveal it, they just kind of show it. And they don't really like comment on it, and they don't really acknowledge it. But for some reason, his nose is alive. I don't know if that's even a demon or they just drew his nose as like a living creature. Anyway, this is so fucking like, that as a gun-loving American redneck, he can never feel safe unless he has a gun on him at all times. And then he rants that he has no emotions for anyone, and that as an American, it's his destiny to take all the world's natural resources. And also, recently, Suki rejected him and friend-zoned him, and we see a flashback, and in the flashback, it seems like he actually took this pretty well. But in the present, he reveals that by rejecting him, she hurt his pride as a man, and therefore he had to kill her. Yakko calls him a low-life murderer, and that he killed a woman for petty reasons. So he threatens to shoot Yakko, and he pistol whips their yak as a friend. And then he eventually loses it and tries to shoot Yakko square in the face, but Neuro blocks the bullet and somehow breaks David's way too long nose. At this point, Neuro turns into his true demon bird form and eats the demon in David's nose. Then from there on out, he's defeated, but yet Neuro still fucking smears natto in his face because fuck it, he's an American and how dare he insult Japan's like prideful fermented bean dish. Yakko tries to undercut the moment after the fact by saying something about he failed to understand other cultures, and then they just kind of forget about him and move on. Yakko tries to go to the hot spring and take a bath, but she sees the demon fish Neuro put in the hot spring, so she decides she can't go. Then everyone just leaves the hot spring and they all go back to Tokyo. The end credits of the show are very chill and just show Yakko sulking at a cafe, staring at birds. Then she surreally travels into a bunch of classic paintings from like a museum. Alright, so that episode was a lot. I'm not as shocked by the racism because I knew it was here 10 years ago. 10 years ago I was fucking shocked and furious. Now I'm just fucking like sad and depressed by it again. Yeah, this fucking show managed to depress me once again. I can never watch the show again after this. I'm just gonna always be thinking about how fucking like mean this is. Alright, so yeah, there's a lot to go over in this episode. Like, the double-edged sword of this episode is like, what the fuck happened in the end? Why did he kill this girl? Was he possessed by a demon? Was that thing in his nose a demon, or was that just like more like racist like caricatures? They never explain it. It just seems like the dude went crazy and then Neuro eats his nose. And I know we shouldn't have any sympathy for a murderer. I mean, fuck all those guys. They should rot in jail. But this episode doesn't make it about the murderer. It makes it a fucking extreme racial thing. And that's why this episode is so fucking awful. Especially the final fuck you at the end where they just like smear natto in the guy's face. Like straight up, like they did not have to make this guy such a fucking stereotype. And then knee into him like all throughout the episode with this nonstop stereotype stuff. Yeah, sure, people have been murdered by their boyfriends all the time. And yeah, sure, international relationships, they're messy. But you didn't need to make it a racial thing, and you didn't have to like run this guy through the dirt just because he was an American. Like, something I need to further know is like, Why is this episode so racist? Is it racist because the original mangaka intended to be? Or is it racist because the animators in the anime decided to fuck around and be like, fuck America? Alright, so now I'm going to read the manga version because fuck it, I got time today. Alright, so episode 14 is apparently a loose adaptation of manga volume 31. And holy shit, the manga has over 100 volumes. But as it turns out, the manga is a little bit different because apparently like every 5 volumes of the manga is like one episode of the show. So manga volume 14 starts out with a surreal parody of like Galaxy Express 999, except everything is demonic. Yako doesn't win onsen tickets from the lottery. It's actually a gift from her mom, who gets way more developed in the manga. She apparently got them free from her job because she's a reporter. And yeah, the manga really builds up her mom in this, where I don't think I ever saw her mom in the anime at all. So I guess they switched it to the lottery subplot to just sweep away her mom. Also, the manga is way more transparent about the abusive nature of Yako and Neuro's relationship. Yako is essentially Neuro's hostage in the manga, since Yako thinks if she doesn't keep Neuro happy, he will kill her. So yeah, they have straight up like an abusive relationship in here. They also take a train to the onsen instead of driving to it, but instead of meeting David Rice at a rest stop, they just run into him on the train. And yeah, David Rice is still shitty in the manga, so okay, David Rice is the mangaka's fault. Okay, so I see what happened. They fused a bunch of chapters together for the manga. It looks like they kind of skimmed over the first one. So the next volume is really the proper start of the episode. We pretty much get the same story from the TV series, but in the manga version, the other woman traveling with David, Akita Rango, she is drawn as another American. So it's less straightforward that all Americans are racist like it was in the anime. Although they did draw her as a very ugly American woman, which is interesting. I guess in the anime they made this less straightforward and tried to pass her off as another Japanese person. However, whereas she is more straightforward in the manga, the murder itself is less straightforward. There's a second suspect who's this morbid, creepy guy, and the manga really like kind of plays up that he's the lead suspect while like pushing suspicion away from David. So it actually takes another 2 chapters for them to like figure out that David did it. Additional suspect riles up David in the way Yako and Neuro did in the anime, and there's way more Neuro using Yako as a tool like he does in Jump Ultimate, so that's actually nice. Now I will say somehow that the manga version of the finale starts off a little less racist than the anime. For example, super racist David is replaced by this weird caricature of him as like sexy Richard Nixon with a knife. Oh no, I spoke too soon. Oh my fuck. So the racist picture of David comes out, and it's actually even more grotesque in the manga. And on the bright side, somehow in the manga the hot dogs actually have ketchup, and the stakes on his head are like the Statue of Liberty now. And also he has Mount Rushmore on his like back, and he's a hunchback. Okay, so yeah, anyway, it takes one more chapter for them to end the story, and the manga's ending is actually somehow worse than the anime's. So in the manga, again, there's no fucking explanation for the dude's fucking nose goblin. But additionally, after breaking the dude's nose, in the manga, Neuro forces him to eat this evil bug called a badger. Dude, badgers aren't bugs. Anyway, so he eats this badger, and the badger curses him to eat non-stop natto or he will die. It's a very dark, fucked up season 0 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Twist. Anyway, after that, the cops still arrest him, but there's this gruesome scene of David like covered in natto, and the strong implication that he will later die in police custody because he won't get natto while he's like stuck in jail. And you know what? The manga actually makes the natto seem a lot more disgusting. It seems like a vile, torturous punishment, whereas in the anime it was just like a fuck you, don't fuck with natto. So, wait. Am I really seeing here that this racist ass manga that they did a racist ass anime adaptation of, the only place where they stop themselves and think, wait, we're going too hard, was with the fucking natto? What the flying fuck? Like, of all the things they could have toned down, it was the natto they toned down? I can't with this anime. I fucking can't. And then there's this extra scene where, like, the creepy alternate suspect dude is like, hey, what the fuck did you do to that guy? You broke his brain, ha ha ha. Yeah, the manga is a lot more detailed than the anime and a little bit more sensible because it skips over less shit, so it makes more sense. But it's just as racist, and in some ways it's even more racist than the anime. Because it's just like full of all these detailed racist depictions of Americans. And look, the reason why this is the most racist anime of all time is just simple. They did not have to make David Rice the murderer, and even if they had to, they didn't have to spend an entire half-hour story saying that he's bad because he's American and that all Americans are incapable of doing good. This entire episode, this entire 5-volume manga, is pretty much telling you that fact number 1, all Americans are bastards. Fact number 2, all Americans are liars. Fact number 3, all Americans will kill you if you deny them sex. And fact number 4, if Americans don't eat natto and they speak Japanese, they're definitely criminals. It's fucking ridiculous. It's basically a crash course in teaching kids to never like Americans. This is fucking propaganda that promotes incorrect and hateful stereotypes, and I'm just fucking not gonna stand for it. And this is definitely the original mangaka's fault, so yeah. Kudos to the anime team for somehow playing up and reveling in the racism that the mangaka created. But yeah, Majin Tante Neuro, the most racist anime I've ever seen. Especially because it targeted Americans living in Japan. And yeah, when this show came out, I was an American living in Japan. So yeah, this hot trash is directly trying to hurt people like me. Fun. Yeah, I mean, backing up to racism in Japan, it's pretty bad there. I mean, like, people aren't in your face. You're not going to get, like, Kanye West going DEFCON on anyone. But there's definitely, like, this subconscious and, like, unspoken racism, and it's very frustrating. Where, like, most Japanese people view anyone who's not Japanese as not a human being. Like, honestly, when I lived in Japan, it slowly wore me down, because you can only be treated like a subhuman for so long before it, like, eventually gets to you. Japan is a lovely place to vacation, and I really want to go back there someday, but day-to-day life there just gets so depressing so fast. And that being said, when I watched this episode, I was already in a dark place in my life, so this was just a kick in the face I really didn't need when I was already feeling sad. Yusei Matsui, the mangaka, has gone on to make several much better than Neuro manga after this one. His most successful work is Assassination Classroom, but fuck him for doing this. He fucking monetized like the suffering of my people. I won't fucking stand by that. Alright, I'm you, Buster Green. Please subscribe. I do video essays. Sometimes. Oh my god, I spoke about this shit for 40 minutes. Wow. Okay, thanks guys. Later.